Hello and welcome to another episode. In this episode, we're going to be looking at the model view and controller aspects of CodeIgniter. This is the second episode in the CodeIgniter series for beginners. And if you haven't watched the first video, the link will be showing somewhere in the top right hand corner. So please click on it, watch it first before watching this one. Now in this episode, we're going to look at how to create a simple model, how to create a simple controller, and how to create a view. And in this case, we'll be simulating a simple sort of login, in quotes, login setup where we load the first page, we click on a button, it logs us in, takes us to the backend, we simulate how we get data from a model, and then display that data on another interface. To do this, we will start, so I have already set up my CodeIgniter folder framework. There's a folder called sample, which is what I'll be opening it up in. Today I'll be using Sublime Text. So I will simply drag it into Sublime Text. Then at the same time, I'll make sure that this project is running by opening a terminal at the same folder. If you're on a Windows platform, you can do the CD for change directory and navigate CD users desktop. Then because mine is on my desktop, then I navigate to your folder. The name of your folder, in my case, it's sample. So this folder was created by downloading the zip file, which I think is pretty straightforward, as I indicated last episode. So in this case, once I am in the folder, I can do php spark serve, which will take us to, will give us a URL that we can access. And just so that we are sure that it's working, we can do localhost port 8080, and we should be seeing this same page here. Now we're going to do a number of things. First, as configuration. So if in your project folder, if you downloaded using Composer, you'll notice that we have a vendor folder and you will be missing a system folder here. That is perfectly okay because they still serve the same purpose. What I'll be more interested in here is this env file. The env file, so we're going to click on it, select everything, copy, right click on sample, we're getting a new file, we'll paste it. Now we're going to save the same file, however we'll save it with a .env extension. All right, so dot extensions are normally reserved for the system, and that's why you'll see a warning. And this allows us to set some configuration settings, or have some configuration settings for our program itself, or our software itself. The purpose of this environment file, and that's why we're having it as a system environment file, is that when you are working as a team, you can have a different environment file for the server, for the live server, one for the testing server, with one for your development server, as we'll be configuring. And this file will have different configurations. So in your database, for your local environment, you could have it as test. In your live server, you could have a different database name. So you could have different credentials for purposes of security. If you're using Git for source versioning or code versioning, then you may want to have your separate files or separate environment files, because as you're sending data on Git, then it's a bit insecure. So the env files will help you in that. In these environment files, you'll notice a number of things. All of these configuration elements are by default commented out by this bash sign. So we're going to change to uncomment out by removing the sharp sign or the bash sign and set this as development. So we wanted to set it to development so that we can be able to see the errors in our system. On this part, from line 40 to line 45, when we'll be using our database files, then we will be working on this database side. And you can actually configure this environment file to add different entities. So for example, if you're having, if you want to integrate M-Pesa or any payment system, then you could add a section for payment system, and you could have the secret, and the key, yeah, in this part. So that will allow you to have those configurations. If you are doing a mailing server, or if you have access to a mailing server, then you could also have it here. Now for our env file, so we are more or less done with our env file. Now in the app, when you open the app itself here and a sample app, you notice a number of configuration elements. We have configurations, we have controllers. So we'll be interested in writing the controllers. We have models. So for now we don't have any models, and we have views. Okay, we have one view. Now we will be creating a number of files in the views. We'll also be creating a number of files in the one file in the controller, and we'll also be creating one model so that we can be able to have a sort of simulated complete system. Now we are not going to be touching anything to do with the routing. We'll look at it next time in the next episode. But for now, we want to look at how do we create a new controller, how do we set the values in the controller to load a new page, and how do we configure this to make sure everything is working correctly. So to do this, we are going to create a new controller. So an easier way of creating a new controller is to simply copy what is there in home, then right clicking on controllers, create a new file. Now please make sure that you have to be very careful, as the names are very sensitive. So if you have it, in our case we'll be creating an auth controller for login logout management and user management essentially. So in this case we will be having the first letter of the controller of the class itself being in uppercase, and the other letters being in lowercase. Yeah. So I'm going to change this to auth, AUTH, and I'm going to save it as auth.php. All right, so this gives us our first controller. Now we will be our first file will be the login. So our index file will load for us the login page. So we'll create a few stub files. So public function process login. So this will handle the backend for the login. We'll also have a public function home page, which will handle our home page, and we can simulate one for register. Public function register. I am using a tool called Tab9 for auto completion. I'll leave the link below. If you are having an educational account, then you could get a free account for that. We have public. So I'm just creating the functions to load the page and handle the page. Yeah. Process registration. So in this case, our index file, our index will be one that will handle our login. So this will be the same as login. Here we will be handle the login backend functionality. Our homepage, load the user homepage. We will be expanding this in the later videos to make sure that we have the different users being taken to different home pages. Register loads the register page, and process registration handle the registration backend functionality. Now we'll be creating very rudimentary pages. An interesting thing about so once we have the model, the controller, we want to go to the views. So in our case, when you're developing a system, it's always good to have what we call modularization. So in this case, I'll create a new folder. I wanted to create a new folder, and I'll call it auth because it's handling the authentication. And inside it, I will create two files. 3 files actually. So I'll have login.php. I will have homepage.php, and I will have register.php. Now I'll make sure the files are valid. So I'll say here we have the title being login page, and I can have a heading 1 element in login, just simply saying that this is the login page. The same can be for register, so that I have this is a register. This is the registration page. So what I've done, I've just copied whatever we had in login and pasted it in register, and I can do the same for home page. And I simply say this is the users home page. Now we want to try and see whether or not we can see when I load auth/index, or just simply auth in the URL, so localhost full colon 8080/auth, which is the controller here, if we can be able to get the value what we are trying to see here. Now so here what I'll do, I'll give the folder name. Remember it's inside a folder in the views, so I'm loading the view inside auth folder, and I'm calling it login.php. Right, so we can now go to the browser. So if I say that /auth, it should simply take you to, and you can see it's the same as saying auth index. Yeah, so this is the login page. All right, so we in the home page we can do the same. So we can return the view auth home page.php, and in the register we can also do the same. We can return, so just make sure that the files do exist inside the folder auth register.php. So again, make sure that if you're not doing the processing, then you have it in singular form. Now in the auth controller, we can see that we have the default, which is the index, we have the process login, we have the home page, we have the register, and we have the process registration. Now what we will be doing here is that we will be creating a link from the login page. So when I click on the login page, I want us to simulate by having a link. When I click on it, it takes me all the way to, it simply calls process login backend. Then here we will also simulate the model. So we'll pretend we have a model that has some data. And once we pretend that we have a model that has some data, we will get some data from that model and use that data in the home page itself. So let's do that. In the login, we can create an anchor tag. We're going to create an anchor tag, and in this case, we're going to use and say this is process login. Here, we are going to be using the site URL, and we will be calling, so this is essentially the site URL. We will be calling the auth controller, so we'll say auth, and what function in auth are we calling? Process login. So we want that to be the path, so process login. So let's see, process login. Let's see. There seems to be an issue with the code. Echo site URL. Yeah, I haven't closed the PHP. That's fine. So make sure that your PHP tags, you've opened it here. You have a PHP opening snippet and a closing snippet. Then you can echo the site URL and you see that. However, this will still not work. We want to be able to use the URL, and therefore we need to load it as as a helper. A helper is simply a file that allows us to do some advanced functionality. So in this case, we will go to base controller, and you will see that we have in the base controller, which the home controller and the auth controller are borrowing from or inheriting from. You can see that we have helpers here, and here protected helpers, and I'm going to simply have it as URL. Okay, so just to make sure that this function is running, we have added a link in the login.php page view. We are sending some data, and this will, later on we'll replace this with a form that we'll be sending with a username and password, and we'll also do we'll also convert this into an Ajax request where we'll send the data from this form all the way to the backend. This will call process login, and this process login here we will handle some items. So firstly, let's just echo works. All right. So if I reload the page and I click on process login, you can see that process login works. So that means that we are able to reach to this part. Now, once we're here, we want to be able to do something. What essentially we'll do in a typical scenario is that we'll query the data. We'll capture the username and password from the form, and we'll query the database. And in this case, we want to simulate that. So we'll assume that we have a username and password, and our database, our model essentially has some data that will give us that result. So in the models folder, right click and create a new file. Call it user model.php. Now it's always important to ensure that you have the data in the name of the file exactly as the class name would be. So here we are creating an opening PHP tag, and we're declaring that we'll be in the namespace. We're in the namespace app models. So in this case, the app models is the app folder here, and we're inside the models, and we will be creating. So here we will say use CodeIgniter model. So CodeIgniter gives you access to a model, and in this case we're going to create a class called user model, and this will extend model. So here we will be creating here we will be defining a way of inserting data to a database and getting data from a database. Our model's task is primarily to get data from a database and insert data from to a database. So sorry, inserting data and getting data from our database. So that is the task of this model. But because we don't have any database interaction already, what we will do is we are going to simply create a mock database, and in this case we're going to have a function called getOneUser. So we'll create a function, public function getOneUser, which we're going to create an array. So I will create an array called user, and I'm going to say, I can say user details is equals to an array that has let's call him Tom Peter, and we're going to return user details. So when someone calls this function, they're going to get user details. Now here in the controller here, we're going to create a new model. So we'll say user model is equals to new user model. And because we'll be using this, we want to be able to allow this controller to have access to the model itself. So how do we do that? We'll say use app models. So we're saying in the folder we want user model. So we're essentially giving it, make sure this is an uppercase, giving it access to the folder, all right, to that particular file, so that we can now create an instance of that class. So first we want to see if we can get the details. So we can say user details is equals to user model, and we're going to be calling get one user. So in this case, we can echo this just to see what is being displayed. And when I reload this page, you can see that we have an array that has Tom and Peter. So the first name is Tom and the second name is Peter, which means that essentially when we clicked on that that link on the index in the login.php file, it took us all the way to this function. We have loaded the model from here. It has taken us to this model. We have gotten data, and later on, as I mentioned, we're going to get this data from a database. We can pass some parameters, so maybe username and password. We get an SQL statement to run, return the data. If it's empty, if it's not empty, then we can use it for something else. Now, what we want to do here is we want to now, once we have this process login, we want to be able to create this in a session. So we want to be able to use what we call sessions to a session essentially is a connection in the server side that allows us to have active or get some data that are moved from file to file. So in this case, we want to move this data from auth controller to homepage.php. Now, but before we do that, because we know up to this point we're getting the data, we want to be able to redirect this to the homepage. How do you do that? Now, CodeIgniter has a very nice function for you. So we can use the function redirect, and we can do what we call function chaining. So when we are chaining, we are saying that you do a redirect and we are chaining this function to another function. So where are we chaining it to? We are going to have auth, and we are calling homepage. So we are calling the function homepage itself here. So if we reload this, let's see. Oh yeah, we should return a redirect. So make sure that we are returning. In CodeIgniter, we're always returning values. And you can see that it has taken us to the homepage. Now, what we want to do is these details that are here, we want to be able to send it to the homepage such that here we can say welcome Tom Peter. All right. And I think that will be what we will do for today. So what I can do is we can call an inbuilt function. So CodeIgniter has another inbuilt function. So we can say my session. Session is a variable that we're just defining. And whenever you call session, session is an inbuilt function that is global in nature. It allows you to access the session variables. I am going to create another a session. So we're going to say session, and I'm going to set. Now, this set function accepts two parameters. The first one is the name of the session, which in our case, we're going to say user details. And the second one is, in my case, the array. So I'm going to copy this array and put it here. This global function is the same way as saying session start and such. So it allows us to be able to create from the services a session that we're able to do session start and session stop. All right. So in this case, I'm in auth. In this case, we can set the session user details, and we're having it as user details. So let's go back, make sure we're in index, process login. It will take us to homepage. Now in this homepage, we want to be able to capture that session. So remember, we are working with PHP. So we can create a PHP snippet here. And we can simply say that we want to first see what data is in the session. So again, we're going to say session is equals to we're calling the global function session. Then we can use a session get function. So I can say here user details is equals to session, and I'm going to use a function, a helper function called get. And what am I getting? User details. I don't know why I'm getting some weird errors. Let's see. This is a PHP file, homepage.php. Perhaps let me just close it and reopen it to see why it's misbehaving. Yes, this should be fine now. Sometimes you need to just refresh the element or the cache. So again, I'm going to echo just to see. It's always good to ensure that you're getting the data. And in this case, I'm going to show the user details and stop execution at that point. So if I reload this page, you can see that we have an array that has Tom and Peter. And now, because I have Tom and Peter, and you can see it's at index 0, index 1, I can simply say first name is equals to user details at index 0, and last name is equals to index 1. And therefore, I can say full name is equals to first name. I'm going to chain it to concatenate it with a space, and I want to add the last name. And therefore, I can say, I can echo welcome full name. And in this case, because we are using the double quotation marks, then this variable here will be expanded. So if we do this, you can see that we have welcome Tom Peter. All right. So if I do process login, it takes me to the login page. So that is essentially how you can do a simple MVC approach. Of course, in the next episode, we'll be breaking down this authentication and having a template file where we'll now have logouts and such. But for now, we have created an index file that takes us to auth login.php. In the login.php, when we click this link, which is called process login, it takes us to auth process login. So auth controller here has a function called process login, which, like we mentioned, we're using user model from the app models. So this namespace here is to allow you to be able to access the files from app models. In this case, we're creating an instance of a model class that we have defined in app models called user model, which extends a model. And we need to have a function that get one user, which returns details about one user, a simple array that we have simulated here. Then from that, we are creating a session. We are setting the user details as that, and we are redirecting this page to auth homepage. Now, essentially calling this function, so which loads for us the homepage for this user. Of course, in future we'll expand it. And this homepage allows us to, we are displaying that this is the user's homepage. We're getting from the session array the details, which we set as user details, and we're getting the first name, the last name, creating a full name, and simply echoing out the full name. So that's it for this episode. It's a bit longer than I expected, but I hope that you have been able to set up the model, the view, and the control, and understand how the three interrelate. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like. You can leave a comment. You can share with your friends. You can subscribe so that you can get notifications on the next episode when I release it. Until next time, have a good time. See you then. Bye-bye.